grab your popcorn, kick back and relax. It's time for some carnage. So, in today's video, we got Boom Beach open, and we're going to be discussing an interesting topic. When Supercell release an update, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, they actually give us changes to the pathfinding. So that might include how they walk to a destination. It might mean how the troops are grouping up, the shape that they're grouping up, all these little things. So how do you figure out exactly what those changes are and what the differences are between what it was and what it is now? So that's what this video is going to be covering, so you guys can see these changes for yourself and figure them out in the future, so it's not an issue for you. This video, I might add before we start, it assumes that you've watched my previous Zooka guide. If you haven't watched that, I should highly suggest you do. There will be a link to that in the video description down below. And that teaches you a lot of stuff about the Zooka pathing, how to predict the troop of, every troop on the screen. So let's jump into this. The very first thing you want to do is you want to get some Zookas, just a whole bunch of them, and you basically want to flare next to a building somewhere. As long as it's reasonably close, it doesn't really matter. I wanted to do it in an open space where I didn't have all these things to worry about. So I've deployed the flare and dropped all my Zookas, and now I've dropped the flare here, my final smoke, and you can see the Zookas on the far left are walking sort of to the left of the grouping, and you can see here the shape that they're formed. So they used to form a circle, which is how we knew it for a long time, and now they're forming a really, really tight square shape. So that's about, I'm going to say about 4 grid squares. So it's a smaller grouping now, which is the first thing we're noticing. And it's also a different shape. So this is interesting. So these are the first things we're noticing straight off the bat. And we noticed that the Zookas are still picking the same side of the grouping to walk to. So we don't have to worry about that. They're always going to pick the shortest possible path. It's very easy to figure out whether that's the case. My last Zooka guide actually teaches you how to do that. So it's easy to figure out whether that's still the case. So now that we know how they group up in a normal scenario, now we're going to look at the only other situation we're really going to encounter in normal gameplay. We're going to figure out how they look when they're grouped up against the wall. So we're just going to barrage out some threats here that are going to be an issue, or that I feel will make our life harder. So we're going to do a Zooka style landing here along the beach. We're going to drop some smokes just so our life's easier. A little bit sloppy, but that doesn't matter too much. So I'm just flaring along here because I don't want to really lose too many Zookas. Here's our final flare, and there is a boulder in our way, but that's not really too much of an issue. So pausing the attack, now we can see that they're not forming a square anymore. They're actually forming a line right across this wall. So the question now is, what happens when there's a building next to the wall? How do they group up then? And this line against the wall, is it always against the wall, or does this line change direction, or what's the story here? So there's a few simple tests that we can do to figure that out. Okay, so now we're back, and we're going to look at what we talked about. What happens when the flare is placed on the wall and there's a building in the way? So we're just grouping up our troops here, and I messed up the grouping a little bit, but this isn't a real life scenario here. We're just mucking around trying to do some tests, so it doesn't matter if I'm wasting smokes. So we placed that last smoke on the flare, and now we're going to see how they're grouping up. Now let's pause the video here. You can see where the Zookas are located. They were trying to form a wall there, but you can see there's some Zookas in the front, and now it's sort of like a triangular, like circle sort of a shape. So, what's going on here? What's actually happened is, because the Zookas that would have normally stood where that sniper tower is, they had to go somewhere. And where did they choose to go? This is the interesting part. They chose to go in front of where the flare is. So, where the Zookas would normally stand, they chose to go in front of them. So they're going to form like more of like a dome shape in that sort of a scenario. So that's how that looks, and that's a very interesting piece of information there. Now we need to know, this line that they're forming against the wall, is this situational? Like, is there anything that changes, or is it always just against the wall? So the easiest way for us to do that is actually to see, put them in a different scenario where the HQ is in a totally different spot to like the angle that we've been doing it, and we're going to actually make the troops walk in a different position as well. So instead of walking up and along the wall, vertically up, we're going to flare into like the middle of the base and then flare to the wall, if that makes any sense. So we just took out the mines there, and let's speed this attack up so it doesn't take too long. So now we're in the middle, we're going to flare on the wall, and there are some statues in the way, but that's not really a problem. Pause the attack there. So you can see, it's a little hard to see with the trees in the way, but they have actually formed a line along that wall there. So from this information we can actually gather that they're always going to position themselves along that wall. So that's some interesting piece of knowledge. We also have seen that they cover more ground, like they spread out more when they're along this wall. So this is how you do it. So you can see what I've done. I've basically done a series of tests. I'm looking at where the Zookas are grouping up, and that's all we're doing. And if you remember back to my Zooka guide, I'd often, when I dropped a flare, I would look at each Zooka and I'd draw a line to where they're going to stop, and I'd see if that path made sense. And each time, when I figured out that logic, I apply it to a series of different scenarios like I have, and see if that logic stays the same. If it stays the same, you know that your theories are correct. If it doesn't stay the same, then you know there's something wrong. There's something you're missing that you need to figure out. So, I hope this has been a video, guys. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope this has covered a lot of things that you may have had questions about. The time I make this video, it's the point in time where the Cryoneers have just been introduced to the game, and as a result of that troop, a series of things were changed to the pathfinding. So that's a part of my reason for this video, and I wanted to keep things relevant so you guys knew all the changes. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.